So welcome to the final session from the EOS Federation for today. My name is Carol Goebel. I'm from the University of Manchester and Elixir, the Research Infrastructure for Life Science Data. And we're going to be talking about the exciting and thrilling world of interoperability. We know that EOSC, the EOSC Federation, unlocking the full potential of the EOSC Federation, hinges on this seamless access and linkage of high-quality research data and the services and streamlined connections. And that means interoperability. That means the EOSC interoperability framework. And we can classify this into two forms, which we're going to discuss today. Technical interoperability, so that's services across the EOS to communicate and exchange data efficiently, and semantic interoperability, so that's standardized metadata that facilitates discovery across the diverse thematic, regional, and national nodes. And this is the cornerstone of our interconnected research environment. And we know that the thematic nodes will have different approaches for their own communities. There may be different approaches at the national level. So we've got a lot of challenges around interoperability. So I'm very excited to say we've got a number of very good panelists and speakers to be able to explore this quite complicated but important area. So to join the discussion, I'll let you all take the photograph of the Slido and go to it. You know the drill by now. Pose your questions. Has everybody got the photograph? Oh. Okay, we're waiting. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, good. Okay, so we have 3 presentations, and I will invite each presenter to come up, and I'll leave the stage, and I'll introduce them as they come up. So our first speaker is Barbara Bagana, who's from the Go Fair Foundation. She's an expert in fair development and a fellowship coordinator of the Go Fair Foundation. She's also the chair of the Research Data Alliance Working Group on iAdopt, which specializes in investigating how to undertake crosswalks on interoperability for observational data. So she's a super expert on semantic interoperability in particular, and she's going to talk to us about what are the technical and or semantic interoperability aspects across EOSC at different levels of maturity. We welcome Barbara.
Okay. Thank you, Carol, for inviting me here. I have been asked to address the technical and semantic interoperability aspects across EOSC. And the question that I really had to focus on was what are the technical and or semantic interoperability aspects across EOSC at different levels of maturity. And actually, the technical and semantic and the maturity level were the terms that, where I would like to focus on. And the question is, which maturity is addressed here? The maturity of the technical, so the tools, the services, or the semantic specifications, or the maturity of the communities that are involved. So there are different maturity levels we can consider. So let's first understand why we have to address semantic interoperability. Well, FAIR addresses it. There's a main principle, the interoperability principle. We know that metadata should actually be machine interpretable by making use of different FAIR enabling resources. That's how we call it at Go Fair Foundation. The FAIR principle one addresses the knowledge representation languages that should be used, but we need also semantic artifacts, and they are addressed in the principle I2. So we talk there about FAIR vocabularies that should be ingested in metadata, and we talk about I3. We say these are semantic models that enable disqualified references in our data and metadata. So how can we achieve interoperability? There are 2 ways, actually. We can converge in the use of these semantic artifacts, so using the same semantic artifacts, but we can also make use of crosswalks and mappings across semantic artifacts applied. So, but what's the reality at the moment? The metadata, we have some metadata schemas. They mostly use literals keywords, but keywords are not really helpful. What are they saying? When semantic terms are used, sometimes then they are still considerably different, they vary across the communities, and they are not interoperable enough. And often semantic artifacts are created just for a project, and then they are no more governed, so they are not really useful. And we also need to know that semantic artifacts are useful for machines, are absolutely necessary. But for humans, they are difficult to understand and to apply, and even more to create. So what we need is major technologies that support semantics, or to make semantics useful. So, for example, metadata editors should allow the ingestion of semantic concepts. That's not always the case. Services should enable the generation of fair mappings and crosswalks, and we are working towards that. We have the FAIR call for EOSC, where we are working towards a registry of mappings and crosswalks. Then but we have now also in the RDA the Fair Mappings Working Group, where I am also then involved, because we need to go further there. Then we need services that support data experts in documenting their data in a machine-readable way. They alone will not do it. And we need those AI to support the verification process, because there's so much to do and we cannot do it manually. So the maturity level of communities. So communities are different, they have different maturity levels. The emerging communities actually aim to be fair from beginning if they can, like DISCO. But there are also major communities, and these sometimes, not always, it's a bit provocative, are reluctant in implementing FAIR because they have running workflows. It works for them. It's all fluid. There's no problem for them, but at the moment when they have to work with other communities, it becomes difficult. And then we have major, and we call them FAIR implementation communities. These are communities that really have the intent to implement the FAIR principles and to make use of FAIR enabling resources in the infrastructure. They invest money in it because they see the value of it. And therefore, EOSC should help to deliver major workflows to support these enabling and major communities in becoming increasingly fair. And one example here, just because I am also one of the chair of the iAdopt working group, we had worked to produce a iAdopt framework, which has been supported by the Research Data Alliance. And the last 2 months, we worked on a challenge. We invited experts from all the world to try to model their variables with the framework to test its interoperability of that iAdopt framework, which actually wants to describe observational data with machine-readable metadata, machine-readable descriptions. And built on this experience, we will then now develop a customizable iAdopt annotation service based on LLMs, but we will also investigate in deterministic methods to find out a good solution so that researchers can just take a service to describe their observational data with natural language, but the output would be machine readable. So we need to communicate between humans and machines, because having just machine readability is not enough, so that researchers can take it up. And this service will be open source and embeddable in different EOSC relevant platforms. And in the Fair to Adapt project, that is a climate adaptation project that starts next year, we will have this also implemented in ErrorHub and in semantic artifact catalogs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Next, I call onto the stage Simon Husson, who's Executive Director of CoData and an expert on data policy issues and research data management. And he's going to speak to us about how should the EOSC interoperability framework evolve and what is missing. This time I will leave you the clicker.
Hello, everyone. I'll add to Carol's introduction that I was also the coordinator of the World Fair project. And obviously what I have to say will come to some extent from that perspective. Carol also welcomed us very nicely, saying that you're here for interoperability, and you should be. Interoperability is fascinating, and it's fundamental. The I and the R of FAIR, I really do think, are the most important. Because if we care, what is this for? You know, why are we here? What on earth are we trying to do? It is really important that we do not become too disconnected from the purpose of our activity, and the purpose is to support the science. And the interoperability and the reusability are there because science needs that support, it needs the data, and it needs data to be combined, to be integrated, to be combinable and integratable. So that's really what we're talking about. How do we put in place the preconditions for that? Now, this question, actually, I'm going to have to remind myself what the question was. How should the interoperability framework evolve, and what is missing? So, what is the EOSC interoperability framework? It's a perfectly good and useful attempt to break down the problem space. And that's what we need. But as we move forward with EOSC and related activities, we need to add considerable detail to that, whether that's semantic, legal, technical, organizational, etc. And this distinction between technical and semantic, it is useful in some contexts, of course, but they are so overlapping in terms of their implementation that sometimes I think that breaks down. And so what I'm going to talk about is the cross-domain interoperability framework that came out of World Fair, which is an attempt to add additional detail to further break down that problem space in certain areas and to add additional detail. I'm not going to go into this slide, but those are the areas where we most focus in the cross-domain interoperability framework. So imagine, if you will, one of these diving into these Mandelbrot sets or one of these dreadful Prezi presentations that you don't seem to see anymore, and you're going in and in and in again. This is how, to a degree, we think about the cross-domain interoperability framework, of adding necessary detail to the EOSC IF, breaking down that problem space further, and providing detail and recommendations. So, I've already let the cat out of the bag for this particular slide. Why do we need interoperability? Let's step back and think about it. We need data aggregation. In the previous session on the handbook, we had another example of data and aggregation leading to scientific breakthrough. This is what is important. This is what we care about. We need to aggregate, we need to integrate, and we need to reduce that opportunity cost of not having fair data, of so much data integration being done on the fly in an unrepeatable and sometimes scarily unreproducible way. And we need, for that, a shift in our thinking from the bibliographic model to the data engineering model for data stewardship. It is no longer enough just to describe a data set with discovery metadata and hope someone will download it and read the README file. We need to describe data sets at far greater levels of detail so that they can be combined and integrated. And we need to enable research data infrastructures to provide that data aggregation, to provide those services, to step up beyond being simply a repository that looks after and stores data in the long term. Those recommendations came from the World Fair policy brief. And so interoperability framework, so it needs to be based, and this is true of the EOSC interoperability framework and the cross-domain interoperability framework that we're developing. It needs to be based on standards supported by implementation guidelines. And you need to do both of those things. Which standards are appropriate, to what extent do they need to be extended, and how do you use it? And this is really what we tried to do in the CDIF report. And it needs to address clearly identified functional requirements based upon common use cases. Not every use case, but the 80-20, and you really need to engage with the research domains to understand what they're trying to do in their research so that you can facilitate and support that. So the purpose of this slide is we need to think about what we're doing in this way. As we start unpacking those areas of the interoperability framework, we need to think about this purpose. And so our contribution to that from World Fair was this, the cross-domain interoperability framework. It's based on a set of concrete implementation-level principles and intended to enhance any community's data management approaches. It's based upon a standards-based approach. It advocates and is a standard-based approach with implementation guidelines. As I said, it adds specific detail to those parts of the EOSC interoperability framework, identifies a set of functional requirements, and takes a modular approach to that, because we can't do everything at once. It is not finished. It does not do everything, of course, but we have to do this in a stepwise way. And, as I said, make standards-based recommendations informed by good practice from the World Fair case studies and from a whole host of international collaborative programs who are doing precisely this, aggregating data, making data more discoverable, and preparing data for integration. The links are there on the slide, and we're still, until the end of this week, asking colleagues to apply to join the working group or advisory group. And I can see Carol getting restless, so I know I'm running out of time. If I can, I just want to show these slides. This is how we break up the problem space in the current publication, discovery, and the standards we recommend, and the implementation guide around those standards. Access. How do you manage fine-grained access to resources? One standard is ODRL. There's a guide to using that in the CDIF. Controlled vocabularies. Describe them with SCOS as a first step. We know that there are other standards with greater degrees of detail, OWL, etc. This is a first step. We're going further. Data description. This is how you describe data at the fine-grained level, at the variable level, to enable data combination. Those are the tools, those standards are the tools to use there. And often when you're combining data sets, you need to use universals. Time, place, other key concepts. There's a handy guide to that. That's where we are at the moment, and this is where we're going. So the green modules is the plan for the next year or so. Further work on further detail on fine-grained access, on context, on provenance, on mappings in collaboration with the RDA group, and data description for integration with integration use cases. All that is already underway and in the pipeline, and we hope that we'll publish that in the next year or two. And that's it. That's me.
Our final speaker is Dimitri Gorias, who's from the Naturalis Biodiversity Center, where he's the CIO. He's also the Executive Director of the European Research Infrastructure, DISCO. And for this meeting here, he's also the co-chair of the FAIR Digital Object Forum. So he's a very busy man. And he's going to speak to us on how to expand the FAIR Digital Objects model to support users with relevant data and compatible services and operations, as opposed to incompatible, one presumes. So where are you, Dimitri? No, there we are. So thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Carol. That's the question I'm supposed to be answering, but as a panel rebel, I will not. So I will start with something else. How many of you are familiar with the FAIR Digital Object specifications? Okay, my job is done, I think. But allow me to say a few things about this. To a certain extent, yes. I will say also a few things. I will go back to, I think it's a quote attributed to Mark Twain, saying that history does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I think it's very interesting to, in our journey towards interoperability and interoperability frameworks, to really get some inspiration from the very beautiful, effective, and simple way through which we sorted out the problem of putting together and connecting networks and computers. It's 60 years ago that this has started, but I think it can still teach us many lessons on how we can go about. And the original set of very suite of protocols that constitute the TCP/IP, effectively, the protocol doesn't care about what moves from one computer or from one network to another. It merely provides a frictionless way through which we can do it. So, of course, today, we're concerned with interoperability at a different level of abstraction. We're not only concerned of moving bit sequences from one place to another, but we want to do this in context. But how important is to start thinking about semantic interoperability without having resolved the foundational element on the agreement on how we actually provide that kind of a context? The FDO Forum, for the last 4 years, has been invested in actually delivering this kind of an approach, the fair digital object architecture, and linked protocols that are able to seamlessly provide that communication on top of these FDOs, fair digital object and fair digital object architectures. So, similarly to the TCP/IP, an FDO does not really care about the payload. It doesn't really care about exactly what kind of information you're moving from one point to the other, but it does care about the structure and whether you have ticked all the boxes that would allow both humans, but more importantly, machines, to interpret it. And the questions we need to ask many times is, okay, what the heck is this thing? This bit sequence? How was it created? Where is it stored? How persistent is it? Who is allowed to access it? What kind of operations are we allowed to do on it? How can we reuse it? How can we interpret it? And all of these questions are fundamental questions. To how many of these questions does an FDO answer? None. Because the goal of the FDO is not really to generate the content, it's to merely have the opportunity to scale this kind of communication by providing the context in which we are needed to provide the information in. So data is useful when data is in context. The very simple view of the FDO is here. Essentially what it does is it bundles persistently together payload and metadata. By metadata, you can extend this to a multiple set of information that is answering potential to the questions I had in the previous slide. So everything in the world of fair digital object has a PID, and everything in the world of fair digital object is a fair digital object, the same way that in a Unix environment, everything is a file. This is the basic structure of the FDOs. And I think in the previous slide that Simon was showing in the interoperability framework, you saw the FDOs at the foundational layer there. But this is exactly where they belong. FDOs and FDO architecture is a necessary but not capable condition to actually deliver interoperability. So we need to start with this agreement, global agreement, on how we want to effectively and efficiently communicate data in context, and of course then build on top of that. Up to now, we have done a lot of work. I'll skip this one. We have done a lot of work on actually delivering protocols and specifications in the FDO. And we have seen a lot of implementations, configurations, if you wish, of FDOs. Here I mentioned a couple, arrow crates being one of them. In the world of digital twins, already we've seen a lot of very interesting configurations of FDOs. But we really need to move forward with establishing the fundamental resources able for the FDO architecture to scale. Similarly to a DNS architecture, we need to build those registries that allow all of these configurations to be interoperable. FDO profile registries, kernel information attribute registries for PIDs, especially when we're talking about handles, repository registries, PID registries, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of work to be done. We've seen and we have established the fact that this is not only feasible, it's absolutely necessary. In Germany, we have a small project, FDO1, I don't know if anyone here is involved, but is looking into demonstrating the testbed, but we need to scale this up. So it is my invitation within the context of EOSC to look together on how we can put these foundations for a syntactic and semantic interoperability. Thank you.
That concludes our talks, and now I invite all the speakers to come up, and also, so you up and down, I know. And I also invite the two chairs of the EOSC Association Semantic and Technical Interoperability Task Force, so Yuri Mag from Maastricht University, I just mangled that, I apologize, and Diego Scodassi from the EGI Foundation. So I'm going to start off with a very easy question, which is, how do you think the EOSC nodes, national and thematic, will be able to engage with the interoperability framework? What are the risks if they don't? It's a simple question, very easy. I thought I'd start with an easy one.
Okay, I can try to answer this very simple question. I would say, as we are doing for all of the main activities within EOSC, we should adopt a step-by-step approach. I don't think we can start creating huge barriers that can make very complex journey EOSC. So we should start with some simple key requirements for interoperation. They can be around some of the key services a node should deliver. I can imagine the catalog of services and data, the AI, something about other core services that are needed to operate a node. And then a second time, going step by step, also with initiatives that would advertise interoperability solution between the different EOSC nodes to increase the level of interoperability the nodes should adhere to be part of EOSC.
Anybody else want to? Barbara and then Simon.
Yeah, so I would like to draw a parallel to Inspire. We had something like 18 years of specification development, or a little bit less, right? So we worked hard. I was also included there in providing specifications, but we had only little time to really develop services. So I think there's a risk that we are spending a lot of time just trying to align different specifications, because there are many in different subdomains and they are not interoperable, etc. But we are not helping data or researchers to really then take it up. And it's a little bit, it's now over, they said in 2020, this should be already established in the different countries, and some have taken it up, others not. I think it will get forgotten after a while if it is not really supported also after, I think, not with money, but with incentives and always demonstrating the value of doing it.
So for us in our thinking around CDIF and that unpacking and adding detail to the interoperability framework, our target audience are research data infrastructures. So whether you call them repositories or archives or data services or even data aggregators, and whether they're dealing with an individual discipline in a given country or whether they're a federation of those, all of those things. And what we hope is that they will take the recommendations and implement them and demonstrate to us that this works. Now, that's not on a wing and a prayer. We base those recommendations on the work of World Fair and engagement with similar organizations that need to provide researchers with data products to do their research. Combined data products for the analysis, science-ready data, as sometimes we call it. So those are the target audience, and those are the people we want to work with. And many of those will be EOS nodes, and the risk of not doing it is, in our view, well, are you going to provide researchers with the data that they need? Not data to be downloaded and then to get the postdoc to do a hack job on the combination, or maybe a very good job, but still with a lot of manual labor. Or are we going to start having, through EOSC and through the data spaces, services that provide us with the data that we need for the research we need?
Okay, so I think that for the document itself, the EOSC Interoperability Framework, it's very interesting times now, because we have one node for now, we will have more nodes next year, and now it's going to start to bounce each other, these nodes, and these nodes are going to bounce to the document, itself. And the important part is that it has to evolve. The document, as was mentioned in the presentation about the living documents, etc., etc. So we have to live it, basically, and that's the step-by-step what Diego mentioned. So this is it. So yeah, challenging times for the document from today, basically, onwards. I'm really looking forward for that. And if it is not going to be compatible, or it's not going to work together, so it's not going to work, so we have to do it. We have to try to do it and try to connect at least two nodes together. That's the first step. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And several of you mentioned services, and also Simon mentioned their providers was a key target. But the things you presented were quite complicated. So you were asking people to restructure their metadata, you were asking people to adopt new protocols. What will be the roadmap to be able to make this interoperability, given that interoperability is also so driven by use cases? So doing interoperability just in case is incredibly expensive. But do we know what the cases are for our interoperability in order to be able to create a cost benefit for investing a lot of infrastructure effort in doing the interoperability? Simon, do you want to? Oh, no, Dimitri. Let's do Dimitri, because he hasn't spoken yet. Come on, Dimitri.
Sorry, Simon.
Then it could be Simon.
No, I was really triggered by what you said, Carol, about the fact that interoperability is demand-driven. And being an ex-researcher myself, I don't remember the time where I really wanted to look into available data sets that I couldn't figure out the way through which I can combine them as an individual. And I think we need to separate between the need to really create interoperable infrastructures and data sets which come with an extremely high cost, not only to generate, but also to maintain, from the needs that individuals researchers have. And I don't see that coming out of anything at this point globally, from the requirement so that machines can able to navigate and semantically interpret all of this information. Because I think the major concern I have is that the issues that have to do with the ability of machines to navigate and understand and generate content out of these infrastructures creates way more risk than the risk of missing out of some individual researchers that might want to do this, but we haven't seen the demand. Of course, it's coming to you.
Yeah. So we're not saying that you need to apply very expensive detailed metadata and semantics to all data all of the time. But one, I think there are ways of reducing the upstream cost of that, or reducing the cost of that by doing it upstream through the research process. Two, yes, we need to respond to demand. And there are high-value, high-ticket, strategically important research questions, almost all of them to do with the grand challenge issues of sustainable development, climate change, and climate change adaptation, which need that sort of investment. And research is going on now, but if we believe the figures in the PwC report, a lot of that research, once again, is relying upon one-off data integration efforts which are conducted manually at great expense rather than the investment upstream in the data description. 2 points. And the last is that a lot of the examples that because World Fair was a global project, because CoData works globally, in Europe and outside, a lot of our examples came from data integration projects in low-resource countries. One of the best examples is another Inspire, I'm afraid, a different Inspire, which is a series of projects on population health run by the African Population Health Research Center in Nairobi. Now, if they can do the data integration work, combining OMOP, CDM, the Odyssey data, vocabularies with DDI, CDI, describing it in schema.org as JSON-LD, then we can do that in Europe. The recommendations for discovery in the World Fair recommendation, in the CDIF, are drawn in significant part, with some tweaks, from the Ocean Data Information System, a UNESCO initiative specifically designed to be compatible with low-resource environments and a low bar. So we need to reel up, if that's a word. You know, some of the arguments about, oh, the cost of it, oh, in the investment of it, I think it's necessary, and it's not as much as we think.
Barbara, and then I'll go on to another question, which will be for our interoperability chairs, just lining you up.
So, as I tried to say before, it should not be on the shoulders of our data domain experts. It should be on the shoulders of terminology providers and service providers to find the solution, because we should really make good quality semantic artifacts that are interoperable. We need also the services to take it up. And so this should not be an effort for the single researchers and research communities. They just should take something that is useful.
Very much. So I've got an online question, which I direct to our chairs of the Interoperability Task Force. So by whom will the semantic interoperability problems in EOS be addressed? An opportunity area group, or is that the Interoperability Task Force?
Okay. Before I mention the notes, basically in the Federation Handbook, and we are talking about the notes, and there was the forum of the notes, you know. So I would say that the task forces are finally going to be able to get these like information. But of course, if it is on the operational question, so it has to be some contact point, you know. And in my personal opinion, this should be the form of the notes, you know, because these systems, nodes, etc., they are going to deal with the everyday issue of that. For example, how you connect EU node with one national node, etc., you know. So this is where we can discuss, sort these activities and ask the expert groups, you know, to bring some solution or ideas. And definitely we have to work with the experts in the opportunity areas, yeah. But I would say that the first contact could be through this nodes forum. Diego, do you agree?
I absolutely agree with you. I would say the task force is a sort of collector of the work of the others. So the task force will receive the input, will get the input that from the EOSC project for the opportunity areas and so on, put everything together and try to create, I would say, a global picture delivering a recommendation. So we don't have to see all these different initiatives in competition, but working together towards the objective.
So, is there any questions in the room? It's the opportunity to wave your hand. Clement, of course. I expected Clement would ask a question. I'm very pleased.
This one was burning. Hello, everyone. My name is Clément Jonquet. I'm from INRAE in France. I want to express a little concern here. I'm glad we've seen these three presentations. I mean, Barbara was starting presenting the vocabularies and the importance of semantic artifacts and all of that. Then Simon, you actually ended up presenting all the CDIF was like recommending a bunch of semantic web vocabularies that are already standardized by W3C and all of that. And then the FDO concept come over. and we're like seeing the future, we can reinvent the web, etc., and make it even more academic. So I share the same dream than you guys there for sure, but I see a very big difference between Simon and Dimitri's presentation that I want to point, and I want your feedback on, is that that second presentation was actually really very much building on top of things that are already there for 20 years, even more than we are building the web and the semantic web. And when the last presentation was presented, and I'm crazy about the concept of FDO too, I dream to see such an object and such a protocol on the web, and then the metadata goes with the data like that. But every time I see the sentence, everything is an FDO and every FDO has a PID, to me that's recall of a sentence that I've heard 25 years ago with Tim Berners-Lee inventing the semantic web after inventing the web 30 years ago, which was everything is a web resource and every web resource has a URI. So how do we build on top of that? We cannot afford reinvent HTTP. We cannot afford reinvent the notion of URIs. We have tons of protocols and things that are based now on RDF and making it happen. And why don't we see these? I mean, the PIDs and URIs going along, the FDO concept going also along and being based on RDF and things that the web has already set up. And I haven't seen any of these in the last presentation. So that's why I'm also looking at you, Dimitri. Thanks for the response.
So, Dimitri?
I fully agree.
Oh, that was quick.
And of course, no one suggests from the FDO that we need to reinvent internet. I started by saying exactly the opposite. But we know that the alternative is way more painful. If we do not agree that we need mechanisms through which metadata and data are coming together in a structured way and are moving from place to place in an agreed upon actionable policy, we will always be facing the same issues. So FDO architecture is not reinventing the internet, is building on top of that. And indeed is a very fundamental approach, but we know it works. It started back in the 90s. Bob Kahn introduced the concept. The same person who came across with TCP/IP. So it's not a new concept, but today the need for such an approach, especially when we're talking about the semantic web, is fundamental. So there is no cost related to this. This is policy. It's about an agreement, a global agreement on how we do things. The architecture itself has very limited technical requirements, essentially none. So it can be implemented with any technology you want it to be implemented, whether it is an RDF approach or very classical approaches. So it's a very simple concept, and that's why I compared it to the simplicity of the TCP/IP. Not to replace it, but to add upon it.
There is also something called WEBI, Fair Digital Objects, which is, I think, the solution here. But Simon.
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, I think, if I understood properly what Clément was saying, that, I mean, the fact that what we're recommending in the CDIF being based upon 20 years of semantic standards, I take that as a compliment. And I don't know whether Clément meant it as such, but but I hope so. And if I know how Clément I'm happy to do it. I mean, the point that I'm trying to make is that I think we're going about this in the right way. We say repeatedly, CDIF is not a new standard, it doesn't pretend to be. It breaks down the problem space, and it provides implementation guidelines of how to use established standards and some emerging standards together for those functional requirements we've identified. And I think that's the right approach. I think that's the approach that we need to take. We shouldn't be inventing new things just because we're innovative and we want a project. We should try to show how the existing tools can make things work by using them together. Now, there is something innovative just in that, but also in some of the things that we've thrown into the recommendations, not least the variable cascade, which is not new either, but I don't think has been used. People haven't thought about using that with the other semantic technologies. Also, structural description of data to help us decompose and recompose data. These are the things that I think are a little bit more new, in the sense that they aren't established standards like the others are, but we're also showing how the standards like ODRL, etc., need to be extended. So this is the coal-face work that I think we all need to try and do.
I have a question here. To wave your hand about, Nadia.
Thank you very much, panel. So I'm from Base for NFDI, and as I said, we started out on a journey to understand what interoperability of service means. So everything you've said, I've heard about data sharing services, data federating services. Would you apply this to common federated services as well? And would you recommend, because we looked at the EOSC interoperability framework, would you say that that was the right way forward for us to understand and give guidance to the potential base services moving forward about interoperability and picking apart the 4 areas of interoperability? Is there anything missing, anything else that we should look into? And does everything you refer to also apply to services into being interoperable?
Suri, you would like to answer?
At the end, when we talk about interoperability, we talk about interoperability of data, but we're also talking about interfaces, API, and so on. So it's a, I think today in this discussion, we focused a lot on data exchange, but this is not the only aspect of the interoperability. So we need to define how services should interact, what kind of interfaces, what are the API, and so on. Also, sometimes we need also to properly translate these interfaces to would allow services to join. I would say currently, for the current real implementation of the EOSC interoperability framework, we have a limited number of guidelines that are mainly around the core services, and they explain how to connect to them. This currently are still, I would say, the guidelines developed by the EOSC Future project that will be further enhanced by the EOSC Node, the EOSC Beyond project, and so on. And this is currently we focus on the connection towards this key element of the EOSC that are the core services. The rest, there are very important discussion, but in my opinion, for the level of maturity of EOSC nowadays, I would say are more for later, when we have the basic infrastructure up and running. Then we need to go a step further and understanding better how to enable the sharing of data between the different communities.
Maybe to add, so you can find already the interoperability guidelines in the resource hub on the EOSC Node portal. That's one thing. And second thing, yeah, we are talking about technical and semantic, but the organization and legal are as well important, you know. And because we are now entering basically to the practical phase where we need the interoperability to work for the federation. So the organizational aspects will be as well important, because sometimes it's hard to think, you know, as in everyday life in the interoperable way, you know, and this is what we are trying to push to the ecosystem. So basically, I would say that there will be many recommendations as well on the organizational things, how these nodes are going to interact, etc. And I would recommend to follow that as well. Thank you.
So I was involved in the EOSC Semantic Interoperability Task Force, and we worked for, we used the interoperability framework, and we then thought, how can we really apply this in practice? And we developed, for example, a semantic interoperability profile, something like the fair implementation profile, as an approach to start the process in the community that tries to think how to operationalize this. So it's looking at semantic services, semantic resources, artifacts, but also at the services that support this specification to make, to realize this interoperability. That's just one, and there's another one service that we developed or we worked towards. And then I know there's the EOSC Semantic Interoperability Task Force 2 now. They are continuing, so there will be more and more coming. So it's not the last thing that has been done, so it's ongoing.
Maybe one more thing, when these national implementations are happening, for example, they have as well these working groups of the researchers of some domains, etc. So, for example, in our country, what I can comment, so we are going to talk about the metadata schema and semantic interoperability between these domains. You know, this is going to be another output, and probably if it makes sense, it will be as well in English. You know, so we can share this kind of knowledge between the nations. Thank you.
Maybe if I can add one point also related to the activities of the task forces for the technical interoperability group. Now that there is a clear idea about what the EOSC Federation architecture should be, we would like to start to identify use cases. We are collecting use cases that would involve multiple nodes to understand what are the common scenarios that should be implemented in EOSC, and this would also drive definition of new aspects of the EOSC interoperability framework.
So following up that point, I'm going to pick the last question from the online, which is a popular one that's just shot off my screen. Here we are. If you could pick one thing that the current infra-EOS projects could join forces on to work on, what would you suggest that you believe most would agree with? So what is, those projects are already funded. They're already funded to do EOSC. To do EOSC implementations, to do EOSC use cases. So what is the one thing that you think they should be doing, you would recommend?
Maybe I would recommend one practice, you know, that we try to integrate to preparation of one of these projects. So basically, if we are talking in the project about interoperability, and then we have the use cases there, so when the use cases are ready and operational, so describe them as well from the point of interoperability, because usually it's not described, you know, it's not visible for the everyday user. So this could be a kind of practice, you know, how we are writing the project, and then we get the interoperability from the concept that is flowing on the sky to the text, you know, to the visible part, you know, what we are doing. So that would be my recommendation.
But is this joining forces of the
it's
projects
joining forces,
rather than a project?
This is just for one project, but it would be nice if we can, for example, try to think about this practice. And for example, for that, I would use the semantic interoperability group to discuss, you know, if this makes sense or not, etc. You know, but I would say that this could help.
So I'm not totally sure, but I would hope that with the Fair Core for EOSC project, we will have really a workable registry of crosswalks and mappings, because this was always missing. Just a hope that it's really helpful, but I would bet that this will bring us forward, if it works.
Thinking forward as well, the new ones that are coming on stream early next year. So we'll be part of the Climate Adapt, one which was funded by InfraEOSC 101. And there, one of the activities will be precisely to implement CDIF modules in those use cases, in those very specific case studies, and package the data in orocrates. So there's a nice alignment there. And certainly we hope that there'll be opportunities to discuss that work with the other InfraEOSC projects and vice versa, so that we bring into what we're trying to do what comes out of the preservation activities and the selection and appraisal activities, etc. But I think we need to think about the mechanism for that. Yes, we know the people on the projects, we can liaise with them, etc. But I really think that one of the best things we had last year to align project work was the winter school. I think that was a fantastic initiative. And I wonder if only one seasonal school is, as it were, is enough. To have those discussions at the detailed implementation level was, from our point of view, was fantastic. I think a lot of people benefited from that. So more of that, a more programmatic approach. It's supposed to be programmatic from the EC's perspective, but too often the projects go off and do what the projects will do because they have their their agreement, and sometimes it can be difficult to shift that. So that dialogue between projects through mechanisms like the Winter School is really what we need.
Yeah, one last point, yeah.
Yeah, if I were, obviously I'm not involved in the process or in any of the projects, but I would say that at the last United Nations General Assembly Science Summit, many European research infrastructures came together talking about the need of really working in a much more meaningful way that we currently do, bring an alliance activity towards specific goals. We've talked a lot about research infrastructures, European research infrastructures and their role in this process. And I would like to highlight that it is important that we support this activity towards, I wouldn't say integration, but at least connecting research infrastructures that represent the interest in the research communities at the heart of it. And I would like to see many of these initiatives really helping, bringing together that existing investment that we have from our member states over the last 15 years. And of course, I would like to say that despite that it might sound like a holy grail and a very far-reached goal, the importance of certain registries to support the FTOs is really fundamental. Without those registries, the same way we have DNS registries, it would be impossible to really reach that level of impact that FTOs have, and they have shown that they have.
So we're just coming to the end. So I think there were a number of themes that emerged. The interoperability is nearly always with a purpose. So just doing interoperability in the abstract is not a particularly wise approach, and we have opportunities in the task force with projects in order to be able to exercise that. Don't reinvent. This was Clément's point. Don't reinvent, reuse, and keep it simple, but also keep it stable, because one cannot implement interoperability if everything's constantly in flux. When in doubt, put a layer in. That's what keeps it stable. I notice everybody have multiple layers in all of their solutions. A programmatic approach should be taken to enhancing and enabling interoperability. That means bringing together projects, bringing together communities in order to be able to develop those interoperability touch points and bridges. And interoperability is a strange mix of both evolution, as Diego said, but also revolution, because you're requiring people to have a different culture of thinking, not thinking in the silos, but thinking beyond their silos. So I think those are the points that I came up with, and I shall ask you later for more points. So we're bang on the time. So can I just thank our wonderful speakers and panelists and our audience and all of those who posed these really good questions. Thank you.